All the body's a stage, and all the systems are merely players. One of these players is the respiratory system, or the way the body gets oxygen and removes carbon dioxide. This part of the body, much like the other major systems, is vital to the maintenance of homeostasis and, by extension, the maintenance of life.
Air first enters the body through the mouth and the nose. Despite the insult, the vast majority of people primarily breathe through their nose via their nasal cavity. This is a large, empty, air-filled space in the middle of the head connected to the pharynx. It is lined with a mucous membrane that traps non-air particles like dust and pollen and stops them from entering the lungs. The rhythmic beating of cilia lining the nasal walls move the mucus and the foreign particles it had trapped down the pharynx, where they can be swallowed into the stomach and destroyed. Going past the nasal cavity leads to the pharynx, the connection between the mouth and the lungs as well as the esophagus. The topmost part is known as the nasopharynx. It connects from the base of the skull to the velum, or soft palate, which joins the roof of the mouth. This is the only part of the pharynx that food isn't intended to move through, since it can only be entered through the nose. It is connected to the auditory tube, a passage connecting the inner ear to the pharynx. The pressure in the inner ear is kept in equilibrium with this tube. The lower parts of the pharynx are the oropharynx and the laryngopharynx. These reach from the uvula to the hyoid bone, a bone in the chin that allows for complicated movements in the mouth, and from the hyoid bone to the epiglottis, respectively. 5 bacteria known as the Hacek organisms live in the oropharynx and can cause infections in some people, particularly small children. Both of these primarily serve to allow food and air through, which is also the pharynx's main function. At the bottom of the throat is the epiglottis, a flap of elastic cartilage that moves depending on if either air or food is coming down the pharynx. If it is air, the epiglottis stands upright and lets it through the larynx. If it is food, the epiglottis folds downward and lets it through the esophagus to the stomach.
After passing the epiglottis, air moves through the larynx, otherwise known as the voice box. This is a segment of cartilage and ligaments that connects the trachea to the pharynx. This contains the vocal cords and also holds back food while breathing. Vocal cords work by constricting the airflow when breathing out. This creates vibrations that we perceive as sound. It is our tongue and lips that form the words. The next important organ in the respiratory system is the trachea, the main airway to the lungs.
After traveling through the trachea, air moves past the hilum, the only entrance or exit of the lung. It serves to attach the membranes covering the ribcage and the main parts of the respiratory system. After moving past this tissue, air is then transferred into the lungs. Although both the left and the right lung serve the same purpose, they are slightly different from one another. While the left lung is divided into 2 separate parts, the right lung contains 3. Both lungs share 2 main parts, the superior lobe, or the top of the lung, and the inferior lobe, or the bottom of the lung, which rests on the diaphragm. However, the right lung also contains the middle lobe. Due to this, the left lung is actually shorter and heavier than the right. The diaphragm is another place where the respiratory system crosses over with another body system, the muscular system. The diaphragm is the main muscle that controls breathing. It separates the chest cavity from the organs such as the small and large intestine. When the diaphragm contracts, air pressure in the lungs decreases, pulling air in, and when it relaxes, air pressure increases, pushing air out. In this way, the diaphragm controls the breathing process. After air travels through the trachea, it splits into either the left or the right lung. It is then divided into smaller and smaller passages called bronchi. The first 2 primary bronchi are appropriately called the left and the right. They are broken down into secondary or lobar bronchi. The lobar bronchi each deliver air into the 5 lobes. The bronchi continue to break into smaller tubes, the smaller being a bronchiole. The bronchiole is the last tube that controls the exchange of air into and out of the alveoli. Alveoli are tiny air sacs surrounded with capillaries. They are the final destination of air within the lungs. Here, oxygen and carbon dioxide are exchanged into and out of the bloodstream respectively. This is accomplished through diffusion. As blood passes by the alveoli, the unusable carbon dioxide moves through its membrane and into the air, while the oxygen in the air diffuses through the membrane in the opposite direction and ends up within the bloodstream. The blood then carries the oxygen throughout the body.
Cellular respiration goes hand in hand with the respiratory system and the circulatory system. In fact, cellular respiration hinges on the breathing process and the supply of blood. Without air passing through the lungs, Oxygen would not be able to be delivered to cells via blood, and carbon dioxide would not be able to be released from the body as a waste product.
In order for cells to have the necessary energy required for cellular processes, glucose and sugar must be present in the cell. The sugar and oxygen break down lipids and carbohydrates and oxidize them to create adenosine triphosphate, or ATP.
During this process, carbon dioxide is created as a byproduct and is put back into the bloodstream to be released during exhalation.
Like the rest of the body, the respiratory system is also faced with a host of diseases. The most common of these is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD. This disease is caused by the extended smoking of cigarettes and leads to the bronchioles becoming misshapen and clogged with mucus, and the alveoli walls to collapse and merge, making fewer, larger alveoli. This causes the body to get less oxygen and remove less carbon dioxide, eventually putting it out of homeostasis. It is the third leading cause of death in the US and will most likely become the third leading cause in the world by 2050.
Another disease that's even worse for the lungs, at least in the short term, is pulmonary edema. Similar to the above, the alveoli will be unable to replace carbon dioxide with oxygen quite as well. However, instead of them getting bigger, they will fill with fluid. Usually, this is caused by heart problems, although it can also be caused by pneumonia, trauma to the chest wall, and even exerted effort at high elevations. Symptoms tend to include difficulty breathing and an inability to take deep breaths, and acute pulmonary edema can lead to death.
Did you know that in some languages like Arabic and Somali, the epiglottis is used to make certain consonants? Did you know if the lungs were open flat, they could cover the size of a tennis court? Did you know the speed of the average sneeze is 100 miles per hour? Did you know breathing was first medically described by Ibn al-Nafis in 1243? Did you know the right lung is larger and heavier than the left because the left has to fit the heart?